your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this week. Well, the big news this past week was the threat of tariffs on Canadian exports to the U.S. being held off for at least 30 days. But this uncertainty is still causing problems for the Canadian business climate. Also last week, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith called for a border czar, but instead the federal government offered up a fentanyl czar to get the last-minute reprieve from tariffs. To discuss this in more detail is Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who sat down with BCN's Jeanette Rocher on Tuesday.
So what says you about all this uncertainty in our Canadian-owned businesses?
This is the worst part of all of this. So yeah, we've got a reprieve for at least 30 days, it says, so it could go longer. That still causes problems for companies that are trying to make decisions about where to place investments. I haven't heard of any investments canceled yet, but speaking to people across various industries, there are some on hold where people were going to maybe do an expansion or decide to, okay, we'll locate a plant here. Those are on hold while all of this is figured out. And I don't think that's going to change with this reprieve because, well, 30 days from now, he could come back and say, you know what? You haven't done enough. I'm going to put the tariffs in. And then beyond that, let's say that the federal government, whether it's under Justin Trudeau or whoever, is able to convince Trump that we're doing enough on the border. And he says, okay, you're not getting the 25% tariffs. Howard Lutnick, who is Trump's pick for Commerce Secretary, said before the Senate Commerce Committee last week that there are another batch of tariffs coming that will be sectoral. And so, that's one that probably oil will not be part of, energy will not be part of, but maybe Canadian beef is going to be on the list, maybe auto parts. These are things that, other things that we trade on a large scale with the Americans, and they might just say, yeah, we don't want that. Or, the big concern if you're a beef rancher in Alberta or pork producer in Quebec is country of origin labeling, which is a non-tariff barrier. So there's a lot of uncertainty going forward, and that puts the entire business climate in this country into question, kind of what Donald Trump wants, though. He wants people to make the decision to build their business, to produce products in the United States, not have them in Canada and ship them down.
Yeah. It's just been such a volatile time, especially to be in the news. Even late last week, we were hearing, February 1st might be pushed back to March 1st. And then it was like, nope, that's not true. And then all of a sudden it was Tuesday and then yesterday. So all this last minute stuff. So how did this particular last minute reprieve come about, Brian?
So my understanding from speaking to people who do know is that Prime Minister Trudeau went onto the call with President Trump in the morning, just expecting that he was going to be told, you're getting slapped with tariffs, they're going ahead as planned. Remember, Trudeau said, when he was questioned by a journalist, have you talked to Donald Trump about this? That was on Saturday night when he came out in response to Trump's announcement. And he admitted that he had not spoken to Donald Trump since the inauguration. That's not a good sign. Canadian Prime Minister should be able to get the American president on the phone pretty much any day of the week. We're supposed to have that tight of a relationship. Trudeau had obviously been trying, and Trump wasn't taking or returning his calls. So on Monday morning, they have a call. Trump starts saying, you have not done anything on the border. And Trudeau replies with, but we've briefed your people on our plan, the one that was released December 17th. They've spoken about it publicly. They agree to have another call. Trump had made it clear that Canada hadn't done enough. And so the Prime Minister and his team spent the rest of the day discussing with Trump and his team what needed to be done, and ended up coming up with the idea of a fentanyl czar. They quantified how many people, 10,000 people on the front lines. We still don't quite know what that is, but that's there. Another $200 million in spending, which of course has to be passed by Parliament, which isn't sitting. But he added enough to the package that Trump was willing to say, okay, you'll get the reprieve. Will it be enough going down the road? We don't know, but it got us the same 30-day reprieve that Mexico got.
Oh, so interesting. And I mean, here we have Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who's been calling for a border czar, well, since last week, really. And instead, the government offers up a fentanyl czar at the last minute to get this reprieve, right? So a lot of people are saying that she's been really smart about this in her thinking from the beginning. So what do you think, Brian? Does that show that Smith was right?
I think it does. And look, she was able to get energy down to 10%. If the tariffs had gone ahead, which of course they haven't, but everything else was going to get 25% energy. And I believe that did include electricity from Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia. That was only going to get 10%. So she did a lot of lobbying on that. And she came up with ideas like the border czar. That's essentially what the fentanyl czar is going to be doing, dealing, well, actually probably a bit more, because the fentanyl czar will be able to go in and deal with money laundering, which is a major issue. You know, and Premier Smith has told me that fentanyl is a problem in Alberta, in British Columbia, and going across the border. So she has been very smart on this all along, despite being called a traitor and worse by, you know, some people in the Canadian media, the Eastern Canadian media establishment, being accused of standing with Donald Trump by Justin Trudeau. Not a very Team Canada approach from the guy who should be the captain of Team Canada, but isn't right now.
According to Health Canada, over 49,000 Canadians have died of opioid overdoses since 2016. And in late October of 2024, the RCMP uncovered the largest and most sophisticated fentanyl and methamphetamine drug superlab in Canada. It was in Falkland, British Columbia, with associated locations in Surrey. Police reported they found enough fentanyl and ingredients to make over 95 million lethal doses. This week, Pierre Poilievre announced his party's proposal that would address the trafficking, production, and distribution of fentanyl in Canada.
As part of my Canada First plan, that common sense Conservatives will bring mandatory prison sentences. There will be life sentences for anyone caught trafficking, producing, or exporting over 40 milligrams of fentanyl. 40 milligrams is enough to kill 20 people. Anyone who is involved in trafficking that amount of fentanyl will get a life sentence. We will lock them up and we will throw away the key. And 15 years for traffickers caught with between 20 milligrams and 40 milligrams will be the new mandatory sentence.
Poilievre pointed out that the Liberal government, with support of the NDP and Bloc parties, passed Bill C-5, which eliminated mandatory jail time for the production and trafficking of hard drugs like fentanyl. The commissioner of the RCMP says listing crime cartels as terrorists would help in the fight against fentanyl in the country. Commissioner Mike Duham says the listing would give the Mounties more tools to pursue charges and enforce the law. He also says appointing a national fentanyl czar would allow a single point person to have an overall picture of what's happening with the dangerous drug. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to impose stiff tariffs against Canada over what he says is a southbound flow of migrants and drugs, including fentanyl. As President Trump continues to hold out on the threat of steep tariffs on Canadian imports in exchange for a safer border, Federal Trade Minister Mary Ng says her government's Team Canada approach is working.
We've probably done over 1,300, meetings and interactions with businesses and stakeholders, labor organizations, governors, legislators at all levels, bipartisan, Republicans as well as Democrats, to really make the point with those who are those businesses or those labor leaders who either on the United States side count on Canada as a big customer. We are the top customer for 36 United States. I keep reminding people that we buy more from the United States. Canada buys more from the United States than Japan, than China, than the United Kingdom combined.
Police officers and the Canada Border Services Agency have stopped a string of illegal border crossings from the U.S. into Canada. 15 people, including children, were caught trying to cross into Alberta and Manitoba in 3 separate incidents over the past few weeks. One incident resulted in the death of one individual. BCN's Landon Hickok has more in this report filed on Thursday.
Just days after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a new federal border security plan, RCMP in Edmonton held a press conference on Wednesday announcing details on 3 separate incursions into Canada, 2 of them occurring in Alberta near the Coutts border crossing.
On Tuesday, February 4th, at approximately 7:45 a.m., an individual attempted to enter Canada through the Coutts port of entry. The male was referred to secondary inspection area. However, he fled the north from the port of entry.
Officers with the Canada Border Services Agency, RCMP detachment, and Lethbridge Police Service began looking out for the man later determined to be a U.S. national. His vehicle was spotted near the town of Raymond, where he was also sighted with a firearm.
A tire deflation device was successfully used by the RCMP south of Mill River, and the vehicle came to a stop. The male then fled on foot and was pursued by RCMP Police Dog Services and other RCMP officers. During the pursuit, the male sustained a self-inflicted firearm-related injury and was pronounced deceased at the scene.
The second event involved a group of 9, 4 adults and 5 youth traveling on foot with suitcases across the border near Coutts. The RCMP was notified by the U.S. Border Patrol on the incursion, and the group was subsequently arrested and taken in for processing. Another incident occurred in Manitoba on January the 14th. Footage from an RCMP plane with thermal imaging captured the event and alerted nearby ground units. Officers located and arrested the group of 6 who were attempting to hide in the woods and took them into the CBSA.
When our members did approach these individuals, that they were not prepared for the Canadian weather. They did not have hats, gloves, mitts, or anything that we would normally see in a Canadian winter people wearing. I will note in all the incidents that I described today, both in Manitoba and Alberta, the weather was incredibly cold and ranging from -20 to -30 degrees Celsius without factoring in the wind chill factor.
As new federal border policies have been pledged, including the $1.3 billion border security plan, RCMP say they have the technology and resources to tackle all illegal activity that comes across the border into Canada. And they are proud of the work that the officers face on a daily basis, citing dangerous and dynamic conditions. For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says Ottawa and the provinces should discuss the possibility of an oil pipeline that runs into eastern Canada. Wilkinson says Canada is left vulnerable by exporting so much of its oil to the U.S., considering the tariff threats from the Trump administration. And coming off of what seemed to be a sudden trade war between Canada and the U.S., Canada's trade reliance from the States has been questioned. Canadian politicians such as Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre have called for increased interprovincial and international oil and gas exports. Gwyn Morgan, the former founder of Encana Corporation, once Canada's largest company, says the nation's best opportunity ahead is liquid natural gas.
LNG is the biggest economic opportunity by far in Canada today. By far, nothing close to it. We have so much natural gas in Canada, in Western Canada, that our only way of making it, we've already got our market saturated in Canada, the United States with it. So the only way that we can make sense of all of this huge resource is to export it through LNG. There's now 2 or 3 other projects underway, and hopefully some of those other people who gave up over those years just because it was so difficult will come back as well. But it's the largest economic opportunity the country has by far of any kind.
As Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been working to appease President Trump with border security measures, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been in the U.S. on some kind of a diplomatic mission to address the tariffs that have been threatened against Canada. Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, explains more with BCN's Jeanette Rocher. He also gave her the scoop of how a conservative activist group known as Take Back Alberta has been fined over $100,000 by Elections Alberta.
So Danielle Smith has been on this sort of hearts and minds campaign for weeks, months, really, actually, meeting with her counterparts in the United States, whether that's governors, Congress people. She of course, made an appearance at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Palm Beach resort, a couple weeks ago. She's sort of been all over, sort of campaigning against the imposition of tariffs, engaging in what she's calling diplomacy. She's been really big on the idea that there's a diplomatic solution to this problem, that this is not a case where retaliatory tariffs or shutting off energy exports or something like that are going to free Canada from this tariff threat. And as you alluded to, the border does seem to have sort of been the thing that did it. Following the phone calls between Trump and Trudeau on Monday, Canada had announced all this stuff actually weeks and weeks ago, such as a $1.3 billion border security plan and things like that. Whether Trump thinks those things happened because of him, I have no idea. But at any rate, the border seems to be the thing that has avoided this for now. From the Alberta perspective, Smith is crediting her diplomatic campaign with so the original tariff was supposed to be 25% across all goods coming from Canada. When it was announced last weekend, it was a 10% tariff on energy exports, which of course would have included a lot of Alberta oil and gas. And Smith is crediting her diplomacy with that reduced rate for some of those products. So we don't obviously know what's going to happen at the end of this 30-day period, but the Alberta government's been big on diplomacy, and they don't show any signs of slowing down on that front.
So switching gears here, Take Back Alberta. Now, this is the conservative activist group headed by David Parker. They've been fined more than $100,000 by Elections Alberta. So apparently they ran afoul of election rules. So what exactly happened there, Tyler?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of rules around bookkeeping and donation accounting and financial reporting and spending rules during an election campaign. There's all sorts of rules that exist for groups that are involved in the Alberta political scene. And those are the rules sort of fundamentally that Take Back Alberta ran afoul of. Now, people will probably remember Take Back Alberta from mainly probably the campaign actually to get Danielle Smith elected as leader of the United Conservative Party after Jason Kenney resigned. It became this sort of quite powerful grassroots for sort of capitalizing on some of the anger after the pandemic, capitalizing on some of the concerns over Alberta's energy industry, brought a lot of new people into the United Conservative Party fold. It's also been quite controversial, frankly, in political circles and in circles on the left that don't like the views of this group. But they ran afoul of these laws that we just discussed. And David Parker, the head of the group, has personally been fined. I think it's about $7,500. So a pretty hefty legal bill for that group. It's unclear what the future might look like for them following the levying of these fines. So I guess we'll wait and see on that front. But a pretty significant crackdown, so to speak, on what was at one point a very major player in Alberta political circles.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned the controversy there, and also controversial, this recently released report from the Alberta government, the province's COVID-19 response. This was highly controversial. So the task force that wrote the report was led by Dr. Gary Davidson, a Red Deer doctor, right? And he's argued in the past that COVID numbers were inflated to justify public health restrictions. So when the task force was announced, Danielle Smith said that she wanted contrarian opinions, and well, I guess she got them then, didn't she, Tyler?
She certainly did. Yeah. This was really controversial even in the beginning. And as you say, Smith was asked directly about this. She said she wanted views from people who'd sort of been shouted down during the pandemic. And this was bound to lead to some controversial outcomes. The report, for example, argued that there should have been more leeway for Alberta doctors to prescribe some off-label medications, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, two medications that were talked about a lot during the pandemic, but that were not sort of shown to be beneficial, particularly in treating COVID-19. There was talk in the report of ending COVID-19 vaccinations for youth. Things like that. It really caught the attention of the medical community for sure. They simply said, look, this is completely offside with where the science is right now. This was a report with conclusions looking for evidence, that sort of thing. And it's put Premier Danielle Smith in a little bit of a tough spot. One of the things that was a challenge for her leading into the 2023 election was the perception among Albertans that she was sort of part of this fringe, I guess you could say, on COVID-19 that was, vaccine hesitant and was concerned about public health measures and those sorts of things. And that probably harmed her election efforts in 2023, even though she won. Since then, she's, I think, tried to govern largely on the mainstream, on the mainstream sort of issues that are concerning Albertans. We've seen that in the fights with Ottawa. We've seen that in the defense of the oil and gas sector, those sorts of things, the sort of issues that Albertans expect from the government. Now, every time COVID rears its ugly head again, in the form of a report like this, which is something that only really the people who are still angry about COVID want to talk about. I mean, I don't think the vast majority of Albertans want to be relitigating any of these questions. It puts her in a tough spot because she gets asked about it by reporters. She says something that maybe is controversial, maybe it isn't, but she's either making some of these people mad or she's alienating a proportion of the sort of the larger Alberta electorate. So it just puts her in a sticky situation.
Owning an electric vehicle in Alberta is about to get more expensive. Beginning February 13th, Albertans will be charged a $200 tax when they register their EVs. The province says this amount is in line with what drivers of a typical internal combustion engine vehicle would be expected to pay each year in fuel tax. The tax will be collected by registry agents and online via My Alberta e-service at the time of registration and each year when owners renew their registrations. Dale Nally, Minister of Service Alberta and Red Tape Reduction, says, quote, "Owners of electric vehicles use the same roads as other Albertan drivers. It's only fair they contribute to public services, including those that ensure the continued safety and upkeep of Alberta's roads." Electric motorcycles and electric off-highway vehicles, such as ATVs, are exempt from the tax, as are hybrid vehicles. Well, it's been a chilly week here in southern Alberta, and local charities are maxing out their resources to help Lethbridge's needy. More on that after the break. The cold weather we are experiencing in Lethbridge is proving to be taxing on some of the resources available to our city's homeless population. I visited the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen to see for myself. Many of Lethbridge's less fortunate are braving the cold to attend to the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen to take in a hot meal and warm their fingers and toes. According to the Soup Kitchen's executive director, however, the time they need to warm up exceeds the resources that his organization has to offer.
We're seeing upwards of 150, 175 people per meal, 3 times a day. For us, that is not a challenge, except that we know when they come in from the minus 23, they would love to stay, but we can't have them stay longer than the hour. So that hits us as well, because our volunteers only have so much time. And so we can't say, well, you could just stay. Our dream is that there would be a daytime warming center, somewhere where people could go.
While it doesn't always boil down to dollars and cents, Bill Ginther says there are many ways to help our cities less fortunate in both small ways and big ways.
When you're out and about, have some gloves with you. I don't know the last time I've kept a pair of gloves, because I see somebody walking outside now they will freeze their fingers. Amputations every winter. So I say to people, you can do something. Small thing, come to volunteer, big thing. Have gloves with you, hand them out like I did last night. We ran out of gloves, I give people socks, put them on your hand.
The cold weather snap is expected to last until the weekend, with a short reprieve on Saturday, then back to those chilly cold temperatures. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day. Streets Alive is running out of donations of winter clothing and is looking for help from the public to restock during this current cold snap.
It's very cold out, and as such, we have been going through all of our winter gear supplies. We did just bring our last load over from our repurposed center and sorting center of jackets and of winter good layerable clothing. We are desperately running low on things like that. So we need winter jackets, we need hoodies, we need sweaters, we need good pants, shoes. We need it all right now. I think we've been very fortunate up to this point this winter. It's been relatively mild, and maybe we got a little used to it, but winter always kind of shows her teeth at some point.
And on the upside, Streets Alive say that renovations to their newly purchased facility are now underway. CEO Cam Kissick says this would greatly increase the capacity of all services that they offer to the homeless and financially insecure. Every February, Black History Month invites us to reflect on and celebrate the vital contributions of the Black community throughout history. Lethbridge Polytechnic kicked off Black History Month to recognize their achievements, resilience, and continue to promote equality and respect. Markham Johnson, Services Specialist at Lethbridge Polytechnic, explains what Black History Month represents for his community.
Many years ago, I thought Black History Month was it wasn't a waste of time, but just not important enough that we should have a month for it. But as I got older, I've realized in terms of culture and people and what we need to share with each other. And so the Polytechnic helps with that. This very event today and this month speaks to that. And so I am very grateful to the Polytechnic that they speak to not just the people here at the Polytechnic as staff and as students, but also the community as well. The importance for me is that we get to teach each other. So it is very, very important to remember to keep it alive, to keep Black history alive. I said in a speech earlier that it's not just Black History Month, but it should be a Black history movement, because it can't just stop for the month of February, right? We have to continue that.
And I feel proud to be a Black student. I never thought of my color being a Black back home. I think the first time I recognized I was Black was the day I landed in Canada. That was my first international travel. So while at the airport, I was like, wow, I am Black, you know.
It was December of 1995 that the House of Commons officially recognized February as Black History Month in Canada. The City of Lethbridge is announcing a new strategic plan for Henderson Lake Park, and the city's Parks Department wants to gather feedback from residents to help shape this plan, because as the park continues to age, the community needs may evolve. The document will guide future planning, improvement projects, and the holistic long-term vision. You can share your thoughts with the city in the Henderson Park Strategic Plan Survey, open until February 28th of 2025. To complete the survey or learn more about the project, visit getinvolvedlethbridge.ca. A group of researchers from all over the world are closely examining the long-term effects that spaceflight has on the human mind and body. 2 Canadian experts involved in the research project are from our very own University of Lethbridge. Hear part of that fascinating interview next. And if you're watching us online, that full interview is available on our YouTube channel.